Hey everybody, before this week's show starts, I wanted to remind you I have a new video podcast called the Tag Team Talent Podcast. That's the Tag Team Talent Podcast, available on YouTube and Spotify, where I share videos of all the comics you've been listening to all these years. So if you get a chance, check out the Tag Team Talent Podcast right away.
This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. This is the podcast Standup Comedy, your host and MC, kind of a history of the stand-up comedy industry. I'm your host, R. Scott Edwards, and I've been doing this for 6 years, and I thought it might be interesting and fun to end this series with an interview of me. But since I can't interview myself, that would just be wrong, I have brought in a very funny guy you've heard many times on the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the show your host for this interview, Bob Worley.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Hey, thanks, everybody. Thank you. No, sit down. Thank you. Yeah, actually, you probably could do this with yourself. You're over there talking to yourself anyways. And,
It's
and I
true
realize,
when you're...
that's a bad look.
When you're a podcaster, I guess you talk to yourself a lot. Well, I appreciate you coming up to the studio to do this.
This should be fun.
Bob's out of Pasadena in Southern California.
South Pass!
He was a professional comic for a couple decades. He's been retired for a while, but a very funny guy, as you've heard on these shows, and also on my new video podcast, the Tag Team Talent Podcast, on YouTube and Spotify. But for this final interview, I wanted to share some of the reasoning and thoughts behind this podcast, and I thought Bob might be a fun guy to do the interview.
And that would be actually my first question. Why even do a podcast back then? Why? What made you think, oh, hey, this is going to be a good idea?
Well, it's not a bad question and good one to start with. Thank you, Bob. The story is this, that I had a large business. I sold it and retired. And I immediately thought I would go into another business. And my wife, Jill, who you've heard on the podcast, made it really clear that she was done dealing with her crazy entrepreneurial husband. And I said, okay, I'll write a book. And she said, no one's going to read your frickin' book. What are you thinking? She goes, you ought to do a podcast.
Very supportive wife.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to read that crap.
And I said, what's a podcast? Because I'm not a very sharp guy. Remember, this is about 7 years ago. So anyway, I did my research. This is all before COVID. And I read some books, met some people in the industry. And in, I think it was February of 19, launched this podcast. I wanted to stay connected to the industry and the people that I loved working with back in the 80s and 90s. A little selfish, I guess.
Well, no, that was a big, it was a big comedy boom back then. So that's a whole couple of decades of it no longer exists in the business. That's what I kept telling you. I go, when you said, well, so what are guys doing nowadays? I go, I don't know. It's so different now. I have no clue.
It really has changed. In fact, one of the reasons I sold my clubs back in 2001 was the industry had shifted. The comics coming through the club were different. I had aged, over 20 years, and comedy was shifting, getting more edgy and more self-deprecating and less about the audience. I was always about entertaining the audience. Anyway, I felt there was a shift. And then about the same time, some guy offered me a buttload of money for the club, so I sold him. I miss it. I liked the people I worked with. And you've heard me name drop over the years, but it was Bob Saget and Dave Coulier who got me started. But we met and got to work with so many people that, you couldn't interact with these days. Sadly, some have passed. But also, a lot of them went on to huge careers. Some disappeared and went into, tire changing. I don't know.
It's work.
Yeah. But it is interesting that I really had a great time of my life. Now, again, to tell people, catch you up, I started the club when I was 24 years old. So I was just a kid. And I was working with these young, talented people. And I just had so much fun that when I retired, I wanted to kind of bring it back, and the podcast allowed me that. You and I reconnected. I got to interview a bunch of comics. I interviewed some club owners, some agents, some managers, and it's really been a study about the stand-up comedy industry.
Well, weren't you one of the first full-time clubs in the early days, like in the early 80s? I mean, when I started, there was like nobody around. We were doing like talent nights.
Right. Well, for those people into the history, in the 60s and 70s, stand-up comedy was regulated to the entertainment between jazz bands or strippers at clubs up in Alaska was a big place that people go. But there wasn't a lot of places where guys could kind of learn the material and try out the material and stuff. And when I opened in August of 1980, it was the 12th full-time comedy club in the entire U.S.
Wow.
And it was an A room, so we had some of, the best of the best. It was like the one step before TV and fame.
Right, yeah.
And an example of that was one of my regulars was Jerry Seinfeld, and he called me up one week and said, "Hey, I need to cancel. I'm doing this pilot for a show." Of course, the show turned out to be Seinfeld. He had a very popular first season. And then what was great about Jerry was he called me up and he goes, "Hey, I owe you a week." And he came back and worked a Thursday through Sunday for the same money that I had booked him on the year and a half before his show hit.
Wow,
so
that won't ever happen again.
No.
So did that show work out for him? I don't know what
Seinfeld?
happened.
Yeah, I think it did okay.
It's good for him. I'd say I was a funny guy.
Well, it was great. You were part of those days. I mean, you were working with some pretty big names at the time.
Yeah.
They weren't big names. We do need to make it clear to the audience. These people weren't famous at the time. Jerry had gotten his show, but, he worked for me for 2 or 3 years even before that.
But he was already kind of a big guy in the business.
But Gary Shandling, Bob Saget, Dave Coulier, they were working my club regularly, and then boom, they get a sitcom or a show or a movie, and then they go on to the next level.
Sure. That's what we call the Scott Who level. Who is this again?
Well, other than Jerry coming back on that owed week, it's true that most of those guys didn't come back. Although we'll say that my friendship with Dave Coulier and Bob Saget was so strong. And again, they're the guys that helped me get started in 1980. In 1990, and Full House had been out. They'd already done America's Funniest Videos. They were celebrities. They came back and did my 10th anniversary show.
Oh, that's sweet.
So Dave, Bob, and Jerry were like the exception to the rule. They came back after their fame and fortune, but most don't. I mean, they move on. We were a stepping stone. We knew that.
Sure, but it's a great club to work. A lot of fun. So when you did this podcast, what were the most fun interviews to do?
Well, it was interesting because I wanted to have a wide berth of interviews to get the different angles. And so, of course, it started with comics like you and people that I loved in the industry. But I interviewed a couple old staff people came back after.
I listened to those shows. Those were great. Actually, those are the most fun shows for me to listen to because they see everybody.
Right. And it was like 50 years later. So it was a part of their youth. And now they've had kids, been married. They're on the second, their third stage in their life. And I go, hey, let's talk about comedy. But there was some old staff people. I really enjoyed talking to other club owners. I got a chance to talk to Bob Fisher, who's a good friend of yours, and a few others I'll get to later. But, a couple agents, a couple managers. It really talking to the other people in the industry that have the same love for stand-up. And again, I need to share with the audience, and this is very selfish, but I want you to understand where I'm coming from. There's lots of forms of great entertainment. Musicians and dancers and actors and singers and all these different types of entertainment. For me, I think one of the hardest is stand-up comedy. Because every night's a new show, new audience, and even though you've done your material for a year or two, you have to make it sound fresh, like you just made it up. And every night was different because every audience is different. You're an actor, you could do a scene, they go, cut, let's do it again. You do how many takes till you get it right. A musician, if you're doing a song, even if you're a big famous band and you mess up a song, no one's going to call you on it. Right. Hey, the Beatles, they forgot this line.
Well, they do, but you can't hear it.
Right over the screens.
It's all up to 10.
But comedy, I think, is a lot more interactive with the public and personal.
Yeah, you do get feedback right away, that's for sure.
Good and bad.
Unfortunately, sometimes. So.
Yeah, definitely.
So were there... You said you mentioned Bob Fisher. Who else did you interview besides Bob? Which was a great interview, by the way. I loved that interview.
Oh, did you get a chance to hear it?
I did. I love the fact that he said he got out of the business when he was watching somebody on stage, and he realized he didn't understand what they were talking about.
Well, that's kind of what I meant. For me, it was 2001. For Bob, it was many years later. He was in the business, 40 years?
Yeah, about that. Maybe.
Yeah, but I got a chance to interview Tom Sims, who had a club, Bob Wheeler, who worked for the Comedy Store, Tom Sawyer, who famously booked some clubs in the Bay Area.
Right.
All these great interviews, and they were all very giving of their time and sharing on the podcast because, one, we were peers. We had similar stories and path and entertainment, but everybody's was similar yet different.
Right.
Why they got into it and where it went and what it took them, I would say in total, we all did pretty well.
I would think so.
Comics and magicians and jugglers come and go, but the club owners, you open your doors every day. You have to clean the floors, get the bathroom set up.
Well, and you had 3 clubs at one point.
Yeah, I had 3. A lot of these guys had 1, but it's a lot of work, but it's there. The brick and mortar aspect is a little bit more permanent than the floating careers of actors and comics and stuff like that. Wouldn't you think? I mean, you were in it.
Yeah. To me, it's, I was thinking how the audience changes because they get obviously older. So they're not going to want to go out second show Friday night anymore because I didn't even want to perform second shows Friday night. It's like, what? There's another show? Come on.
Yeah. Friday Night Late Show was always the nightmare show because people had worked all day. Then they go drinking until 10:30.
Right.
And then, oh, hey, entertain me.
Right.
So they were always the drunkest, rudest crowds. But, that's part of the game.
But, again, the audiences have changed because, media is different now and everything's completely different. So... you really started the club right at the beginning of the whole boom.
I was so lucky catching that wave.
Well, I was lucky too because you were around. So it's
like,
oh, good.
It worked out for both of us. But to educate people in the listening audience, when I opened, it was the 12th club in the country, and that's 1980. By 1985, all the discos, and there were thousands of them around the country, became comedy clubs. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't quite like Starbucks where they're on every corner, but every major city had a comedy club by 1985. And then it hit TV with Evening at the Improv and Live at the Comedy Store. And I think stand-up comedy became more mainstream. It was kind of an underground entertainment format, and it got more mainstream.
Well, in the early days, too, you would see the same batch of comics everywhere you went because there was only a few people that could do it on the road. Right. And then after a while, those cities started having their own comics, and they were pretty good. So
creating their own pool.
Yeah, creating their own pool of comics. So,
that's true.
So they would bring in a headliner, and then they'd have, an opener and middle to fill the
it's so funny. I never thought of it that way. It's so true that even in my clubs in Sacramento, and I had a club in Stockton for a while, 5 years, the originally, everybody came from L.A. and San Francisco, kind of pools that were already there.
Or East Coast would be New York.
But then I ended up developing some of my own talent. Randy Benton, or we know him as Ben Tony, went on a national tour. Lynn Stobener opened up for Ellen in concert.
Right. You don't have to edit that. You can keep that.
And then, but there's been a few people that got their start at our club and went on to a good career.
Yeah, a lot of
were
good
one
people
of those.
It was always fun to come here because everybody was going to be good. And then you knew how to build a show.
Well, now he's kissing up a little because I was producing and booking the show. So thank you for that.
Well, no, what I meant is you didn't have some guy like, oh, you're going to struggle after this guy. This guy's going to blow you out of the water.
Oh.
And I always thought, well, why do you want him to blow me out of the water? Aren't I supposed to close the show?
Well, it is important, and a lot of people don't realize the challenge of producing comedy is not just finding the talent. and making sure they're going to fit your audience. You know, I had a few comics that didn't gel with the Sacramento audience, but as a producer, you want to lay out the show so that each guy's a little bit better than the guy before. Because as you said, if you put up, you know, Robin Williams in the spot A by spot C, nobody's listening.
There is no spot C.
Yeah. It's kind of done.
So after all the years, are there guys that you interviewed during the podcast that are no longer with us that you're glad that you did, and people that you didn't that you wish you did?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, I was really good friends with Bob Saget, and we had a interview on the books, but he tragically passed with his accident, and I wasn't able to interview Bob Saget, but I was able to introduce everybody to Amazing Jonathan, who had his own shows in Vegas, but he wasn't, and he had a TV show for a while, but I wouldn't say he was, you know, he wasn't Seinfeld famous, but he was a really crazy, unique magician,
well, he
comic
was a mainstay
magician.
in Las Vegas for a long time.
But I mean, outside of Vegas, I don't know how famous he was, even though he did have a TV show for a while. But still, Amazing Jonathan was a wonderful interview. Sadly, within months of finishing it, he did finally pass. He had heart issues for a while, but that's part of the interview. You got to listen to it. It's pretty amazing. And then the other one was Kelly Monteith, great guy who's really famous in England, but he's an American comic that got celebrity with his own TV show for a number of years in England. And I got a chance to interview him. We had a wonderful interview. You should go find it and listen to it. But he passed within 6 months of finishing it. So even though it's always sad to lose somebody from an industry you love, I felt lucky that I had a chance to interview them and get their story out there to the world before. So that was, like you said, sad, but
at least you got it.
Interesting.
At least you got it in.
Yeah, and learned stuff. You know, both these guys had totally different careers, but both very successful.
So, out of the living comics, who were some of your favorites to talk to and interview?
Well,
Bob Worley. Oh, really, Bob?
Yeah, Bob Worley
is
always funny. He's amazing. Well, what's interesting, it's not always the people that people know. You know, like I was finally able to catch up with Tree. And a very unique comic that nobody would remember that he did it, but
anybody that ever saw him would go, "Oh yeah, that guy."
Yeah, he was an amazing interview, and I ran down Jim Jays, who was Clancy the Clown.
Oh yeah.
Who was the guy that opened my shows for like 10 years.
It was a lot of fun.
But he's like a real mime clown that opened the shows. And we had lost contact, 50 years ago, and I was able to run him down and do an interview. That was fun. So there's been some of the not so famous, because the podcast where we interviewed the famous and not so famous.
Well, there were
sometimes the really fun ones.
Great comics that never, hit the big time. I mean, I never hit the big time, but I was consistently okay. I could do the time.
You were funny, Bob. But yeah, you're a great example of somebody who was important in the industry in the 80s, was really, really funny, but didn't get that golden ticket and become the 1% that were famous. But you knew and worked with, Fred Wolf and Peter Galke, and there's a number of people that you worked hand in hand with career-wise that ended up with amazing careers.
Yeah, or, good enough careers.
Well, Fred Wolf worked at Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, so did Pete. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I could have been fired from that show. But who else? And you also did these roundtable things too. I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, you as a producer of a podcast, you always want to know, well, what can I bring to the audience that will be engaging and unique and still stick with the theme of the stand-up comedy industry. So after sharing literally hours of stand-up comedy recorded back in the 80s and 90s, and then adding the interviews of comics and industry leaders like Bob Fisher and Tom Sawyer, doing the roundtables was something that I thought, and I think it worked out. I know you were a part of a couple of them.
Yeah, I did with Jazz Kaner and Peter Galke.
Yeah, and
the Surfer Show.
But what was great was then you had people in one room. We got Bruce Baum in and Jamie Alcroft and
Arch Barker and
and we get them in a room, and then they share stories, and they're laughing and making each other laugh. I got to tell you, as a listener of this podcast, that as much as comics are fun and interesting on stage as entertainers, there's this whole world backstage where things can be said and things can be done, and that is so funny at a different level. You know, it was so doing the round table, the comics were sharing stories that you wouldn't hear as a comedy bit on stage, but were really funny and interesting.
I think when I did it with those two guys, I didn't feel like anybody was trying to, up each other, because usually, that's what comics do. They sit around, oh, that's nothing. But, it was just fun, conversation about things that we've all been through.
That was true. Nobody tried to one-up somebody else, and I think that, one, that shows their professionalism, and two, the people I did in roundtables were friends, and that really helped. That, they had already a relationship that they can interact and share stories with.
Yeah. Speaking of that, friends, I notice on the shows, because I listened to quite a few, because, I had nothing else to do. You don't really have a lot of women comics on. Why is that?
Well, good question.
Thank you.
Back in the 80s and 90s, there were some female comics, but not very many. As those that have studied comedy know, that Joan Rivers was one of the first women comics to really burst through that glass ceiling. And some people might say Lucille Ball or something, but she was more of an actress, so that was different. We're talking about stand-up comedy, and it was Joan Rivers, I think, everybody would say was kind of the first one.
Well, Phyllis Diller.
Was she doing a lot of stand-up?
She did stand-up, yeah.
That would have been early, though, 50s, right?
How far do we want to go back?
Well,
Vaudeville?
Joan was doing it in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And,
well, she did Ed Sullivan, too, I think.
Yeah, well, that goes back a ways. Well, there weren't a ton. Right. I mean, Ellen worked my club. Paula Poundstone kind of got her start at my club. But when it came to doing the podcast, less women stayed in the business than the men.
Well,
they had kids, they got married.
All that, and this business just beats you down, all the travel.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the road.
Stay with a bunch of boneheads, or the rooms they put you up in. It's just terrible.
Well, I did get a chance to interview Kathy Ladman, Lois Bromfield, who's hilarious, Monica Piper, Lynn Stobener, who's family. I mean, she's local. Lois is living in Germany.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. She was in Germany, I was here, and we had a really great conversation. If you get a chance, go find it. But you're right. I mean, I maybe interviewed Karen Anderson. I did interview. She's a writer that was a stand-up comic in the early days. In fact, got her start at my club.
Yeah,
and then
we worked together.
Writing for Ellen and a few other shows. And she's still working on scripts with people. She's a very big success as a writer. That's the other thing that's interesting about stand-up comedy is it's one of the few entertainment careers where after you got your career started, struggling as a stage comic, and maybe you can speak to this, very few of them actually stayed in comedy. Some become actors, some become writers, some become producers.
Right.
How would you explain that?
Well, it is like a stepping stone, you want to move, first of all, you want a steady gig, because if you're going to be a road comic, that's rough, and it's not a great way to make a living. So, but yeah, most people go into writing, like you said, Fred and Peter and
Karen Anderson.
Yeah. So it's his way out.
And then others went into acting. Larry Miller.
Yeah, because they're talented. And
Kevin Pollak. All these guys work for me. Kevin Pollak has had some of the biggest movies ever made.
I know. Actually, Peter and I auditioned for a show that he eventually got. Him and another guy got the show.
Oh, really?
But it didn't last because they got the wrong people, Scott. But no, he is extremely talented. And still doing a lot of work.
And what's funny was a lot of people don't know. Well, maybe if you paid attention, but he got his start as a comic impressionist.
Right.
He did a lot of impressions.
Peter Falk is his.
Yeah, he got Johnny Carson's show with the Peter Falk
Albert
made him
Brooks
famous.
that I loved.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Those are classics.
Yeah.
But so Kevin Pollak, but even Bob Saget, Dave Coulier went into television. One of my really good friends, and I was so happy to get to know, was Harry Anderson, who sadly we've lost, but he was doing Comedy Magic, and had started getting some notoriety. He was a semi-regular on the TV show Cheers, but he was so good he got his own show, Night Court, and now it's got a new phase with other actors. But Harry was an incredible entertainer on stage.
And a nice person.
Yeah, and really successful. You know, people like that were fun to work with. I became really good friends. I should probably segue into this. My father had a great sense of humor, and because I wanted to impress my father, I brought Soupy Sales in, these classic comics, and he actually threw a pie in my face. And anybody that knows the Soupy Sales history knows that.
Bang.
Yeah, he threw pies in the face of, presidents and Muhammad Ali and famous people. Well, I got a pie in the face from Soupy Sales, but I became very good friends with Pat Paulson. Got a chance to introduce my dad to him, and, I was a hero.
Which you did an interview with your dad.
Yes, I did do an interview with my dad.
I enjoyed that. That was really nice.
Oh, did you listen?
Yeah, it was offbeat.
Oh, that's great.
Nice, and you had a good sense of humor.
I did a couple selfish interviews. My father was one. I did it for a Father's Day show, and he passed away not too long after that. So I get to share that a couple times, and it was a really fun interview. He had an amazing memory. But I've done an interview with my wife and your wife.
Right.
Did an interview of what was like to be married to goofballs like us. So there's been some selfish interviews.
Yeah.
But,
Anybody else in that kind of realm that?
Well, Lynn Stobener's like family. I mean, she became a professional comic, got out of the business at a young age, but she ran some of my clubs and was everything from a food girl to the club manager to a professional comic. So that was a fun interview. Lynn Stobener was important in my life, but I've known her since she was 6.
Right,
She's like my little sister. So that was interesting. But
and Bob too, her brother, you interviewed.
Bob who?
Stobener.
Bob Stobener. I'm just joking. He's been my partner in 4 different companies. He was my partner in the beginning of Laughs Unlimited, and you guys have heard his voice 100 times. He's been a great friend and value. I've actually never interviewed him. We've interviewed kind of each other, and somebody interviewed us as the entrepreneurs that started the club. But no, Bob's very important to my life and this podcast and in all my experience in comedy. So thank you for mentioning my good friend Bob Stobener.
I remember like Mac and Richie, those guys.
Who? No. Those guys were so important.
Yeah, no, there's anybody else from that time that you got to interview and kind of reminisce about?
It was no.
Okay. Right,
no, there's just too many. I mean, I tried different tangents to keep the podcast interesting, I mentioned. So I did the roundtables, which were a group of 4, 3 to 4 people all talking about comedy. But I also did theme shows. I got a couple radio personalities. Remember Paul and Phil from Y92?
Yeah, very nice guys.
And they went on to be the Answer Guys on the Discovery Channel. And then also Tom Nakashima, who's still a famous rock and roll DJ here in Sacramento. So I've interviewed guys that did radio. Some of the more interesting people that I haven't name dropped yet, but you got to go look for their interviews, people. Ed Solomon. Now, that's a name I don't think anybody knows, but he's written some of the biggest movies. Now You See Him. Now You See Me. Is that how it is? He also did all the Men in Black movies.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's written a bunch of movies that have made...
But those just did okay.
Well, let's just say I interviewed him from his castle in England. It was amazing. But also Will Schreiner, who worked my club before he got his show.
Nice person.
Yeah, and he's on the East Coast. So the podcast allowed me to do some really fun, interesting interviews and then name drop them here.
Yeah, and like you said, you got to reconnect with a lot of guys that you had worked with over the years.
And I think that's, one of the reasons I did it was it is kind of reminiscent. It is kind of a history. In fact, the greatest compliment I got on this podcast was, to me, it was just a labor of love. I just love the people. I love the industry. I like the comedy. And I got to share it with the world through this podcast. But a couple of people have commented after listening to a number of the interviews that it really is a history, an audio history of stand-up comedy from the 80s and 90s that nobody else has done. I mean, there's a podcast called The History of stand-up, but it just scratches the veneer surface of it.
And that whole decade, the 80s, and well, I guess both decades were really instrumental in the whole boom thing. But you did interview, like I listened to George. You did George Wallace.
Oh, I totally forgot about George.
Yeah.
My very first headliner.
Yeah.
August of 1980. The opening act was Gary Shandling, who made $150 to do a 20-minute set, and the headliner was George Wallace, who had his own show in Vegas for many years. Did a ton of TV back in the 80s. He was already basically a celebrity, but I was able to get him thanks to Gary.
Yeah. That was Willie Tyler and Lester.
Oh, Willie Tyler.
Yeah.
That was a fun interview.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed Lester.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because he's the funny one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just sits there.
It's funny you mentioned that. Willie Tyler is a great ventriloquist. He's still out there doing a few things here and there, but did a ton of TV back in the 70s and 80s. He was really a big celebrity. Kind of dropped off in the 90s as he got older. Very funny guy, good friend, and it was a good interview. Somebody else that was interesting that nobody would expect because it wasn't really connected with the stand-up comedy industry. If you do, go to the Googler and check out Dick Bright. And he's a music producer out of San Francisco. And I knew him because he did the album for Bruce Baum.
Oh, okay.
Remember Marty Feldman Eyes, the hit
yeah.
record back in the day? And I worked with Dick and Bruce in the studio in San Francisco. Kind of, made a little bit of a relationship. We're not friends or anything. But when I was doing the podcast, I reached out to him, and we had a great interview about how he's really a musician and has done tons of really important work in music in San Francisco, but how dipping into comedy with Alex Bennett on the radio there in San Francisco and Bruce Baum and people like that really was interesting to hear that story. So that was a fun interview.
All right. Now, who in your mind would be your top 10 comics that you interviewed, not top 10 comics, but that you actually talked to?
Yeah, you couldn't really...
Worley.
Say Bob Worley. Definitely.
Definitely number one.
Well, the thing is you can't go by who you enjoy the most because everybody's different. And,
right.
Comedy is so, what's the right word? It's a personal, everybody reacts differently.
Yeah, that's why I never liked contests, because how do you, judge one person from another? Everybody's so different. So, like I remember Andy Kindler.
Andy Kindler's was a great interview, by the way.
Yeah, because he's quick and he's fast and he's, and he knows a lot. Yakov Smirnoff was good.
Yeah.
Interesting time.
Oh, you're bringing up some of my favorite interviews.
David Strassman, the first guy I ever worked with.
Was who?
David Strassman.
Oh,
Chuck Wood.
By the way, David Strassman, world famous comic ventriloquist. He is a huge celebrity in Australia.
Right.
He just retired earlier this year.
Arch Barker too. He's in Australia.
Arch Barker lives in Australia, and I got to interview him. Wow, you're bringing up some great people.
Well, John Pate. That was another guy.
It was really the podcast let me relive what was a highlight of my life, which was working in the industry back in those days. And you mentioned, Bobby Slayton. I mean, he was so insulting and yet so hilarious on his interview.
Well, that's why he's funny.
But that's why he's the pit bull of comedy.
Right.
You mentioned George Wallace, Tom McTeague, who's now retired, but he was in Baywatch.
Yeah.
He was on Baywatch. He was in movies. He did
because
TV
we're all
commercials.
watching Tom McTeague with those chicks that are on the show, and hey, that Tom guy, he's hot.
Yeah. Okay. But I'm just saying, reconnecting with him, and he's now retired, but he had a great career in television, and talking about how comedy was the springboard to his career.
Right. I think for a lot of people it was.
Really interesting. The Yakov Smirnoff interview, you mentioned that. He talks about how difficult it was to get out of Russia and what they had to do. His family actually sold condoms on the streets of France to get enough money to get over to America. I mean, that story's not going to be heard anywhere else.
And for good reason.
Well, but it's still interesting. But
and not new condoms either. No. No.
Andy Kindler, who is a real unique person, did a lot of work with David Letterman. Bruce Baum. I mean, the classic. Baby man Bruce Baum. Classic prop comedy, and not a famous guy, but definitely one of the most entertaining people ever on stage.
We should stop with the name dropping because you're going to miss somebody and they're going to feel like, hey, I worked for him all the time.
Yeah, that would be
Gary
true.
Muledeer, I know he worked a lot for you.
Yeah, let's take this moment, since we're name dropping, and talk about people that weren't stand-up comics.
Oh, that's all right.
But they had a tie to the industry, but they never worked for me. Let me put it that way. I'm not saying they weren't
because they just weren't that funny. I'm sure they could do stuff, but they get up, they just stand there, push papers.
I'm probably setting this up wrong, but I did want to name drop, but I wanted to share some of the interviews. Reason I'm dropping the names, people, is I want you to go back, find the shows that you think would fit your entertainment needs, and listen to these interviews because they're amazing. But there were a few people that never worked for me, but that had such an interesting part of how comedy touched their lives. One was Mike Lucas. That's recent. He's written several books on comedy. He teaches comedy. He's also authored some other books, but a really interesting interview. But did you know I got a chance to interview a couple times Tom Dreesen?
Oh, yeah. See, but he is a comic.
But he's a comic, but he never worked for me, but he was on such a high level.
Yeah, I mean, he opened for Sinatra, and I mean, yeah.
He opened for Sinatra for like 15 years.
Show,
he co-hosted.
Billions of times.
Oh,
yeah.
But Tom Dreesen and I are like on a first name basis now. And it's like, it wouldn't have happened if not for this podcast. And he's told such amazing stories. So if you get a chance, there's several bonus shows where Tom tells a Frank Sinatra story.
So you call him Tom or Tommy?
I call him Tom, but Frank called him Tommy. Anyway, it was interesting. Chris Barnes, who was more of a comic actor, but he had an interesting background. A guy, an attorney named Carl Unigbu.
Well, you really wanted to drop that name, and you can't even get out.
Well, he wrote a comedy about. I'm sorry. Let's start over. He wrote a book about stand-up comedy and the copyright issues and the defamation of character issues.
Right.
And so he wrote a book to try to protect and help people in the industry. And I got a chance to interview him and get a copy of his book. And that was just interesting. And then just recently, I got a chance to interview Susan Morrison, who did a biography from Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yeah. I read part of that actually here.
Yeah.
Before that interview.
And got a chance to share that story of the beginning of Saturday Night Live and the man behind it. And it was incredible to get a chance to talk to her as she was behind the scenes.
Well, not to go off, script or anything, but didn't a lot of guys that work for you end up on Saturday Night Live, like you said?
Oh yeah, Dana Carvey.
Dana was like
we didn't even mention Dana's name yet, but I haven't interviewed him.
There, we got it
big.
in. I put it in there.
Yeah, you did. Dana Carvey started out of San Francisco, worked for us for years, was playing "Choppin' Broccoli," a song that went number one after Saturday Night Live.
Which I think he auditioned with. That got him on.
Yeah, that got him on the show. Yeah. He was huge. Kevin Nealon went on. Fred Wolf and Peter Galke, but there was been a few over the years that worked for me and then went on.
Bob Worley has watched the show.
He has. While we were talking about non-comics, I did do an interview with Kirsten Schultz, who's a German actress who recently wrote a book, and she's not really a comic, she's an actress, but she was doing a comedic role in a killer clown movie, and now she's considered a comedic actress. And so that was an interesting interview, Kirsten Schultz, just because she kind of skimmed the veneer of the industry. She's not really a stand-up comic, but now she's considered a comedic actress after being a killer clown. It's just wild.
Well, that's a stepping stone into the business, killing.
Something that worked. But I've been name dropping all these people, and I apologize. I know it's getting old, but it's because these are the interviews you might want to go back and listen to.
Did you interview Bob Goldthwait at all?
No, Bob Goldthwait worked for me, but I didn't get a chance to interview him. But there's so many people.
And the
Mac and Jamie.
The engineer would just be a nightmare with it. It's not much of an interview. So Bob, how are you? So,
yeah, it was. There's a number of people. Sam Kennison, worked for me, and
nice person.
And he was crazy man on stage, but Bobcat, of course,
and off stage, I might add.
Oh, well, who did you really enjoy working with back in the day or in my club?
Pretty much everybody that was here was just good. It was always fun to, Dana was fun to work with. Coulier was fun. Bob was fun. I mean, it's
kind of hard to come. It's like you said, you'll forget a name.
Yeah, and everybody that I worked with, Mo Betterman, I like always working with him, and Ken Garr, guys like that. I mean, I always had Bentoni, was always fun. I mean, there's just a lot of people that you just had a good time with. So, John Henton was fun. Jimmy
there was
Burns.
A lot.
I'm throwing out names of people. Who? What?
Yeah.
But
these were good, solid comics.
And then you had, like I said, a lot of big names. John Fox was fun, even though I know.
Oh, geez, John Fox. Yeah. How did we not mention that name?
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to interview him. Sadly, he passed away. It was sad that we lost him, but boy, there wasn't another person that abused his body more.
Oh, man. When I worked your room in Birdcage, I remember he went up on stage and I could hear somebody on and go, I just saw that guy puking in the bathroom. And he killed.
Oh, he chased me around the green room once with a spoonful of Coke and, take it, you pussy, take it. And then, I ended up firing him. I don't know if you heard the story.
Do we need to share that story?
Well, it just for reference to why he was one of the funniest comics ever, but he had no filter, no control. And I'm out introducing, the headliner, one of the acts, and I go back to the green room, and there's a blow-up doll on the floor, and John's got his dick out, and he's peeing on the face of the blow-up doll just to make the other comics laugh.
It was consensual.
The point was it was totally disrespectful of the club and of me, and I fired him. But, before that, he was one of the funniest guys and always killed. So that you get this yin and yang of the industry. Yeah. And we were talking about this earlier off mic, and that there were so many people that we got to work with that were funny on stage, but there were some that were really funnier off stage or a huge problem off stage. There's the partiers and the guys that were constantly chasing tail.
I think it was that decade, too, because for a while there, comics were like the rock and roll of entertainment. So
how did you steer clear of drugs?
I'm not very good. So
no,
I just went home.
You're hilarious.
I went home. I've been married forever, so I just went home.
Yeah, you did get married young. You married your high school sweetheart.
Well, she was in high school. But
the
anyways,
lovely Bernice.
Yeah, thank you. So no, I just wasn't into it. And I hung out with guys that weren't into it. Like Peter wasn't into it, and friend Pat Hannafin was into it.
It is
Fred's
kind of
into it.
It is like a lot of life. Comedy, like any industry, had its cliques. You had the druggies, you had the guys that drank themselves to sleep every night, and the woman chasers. I mean, I guess that's fairly common, at least in entertainment in Hollywood. There's always a little bit of the shenanigans that I know as a club owner. I had my famous 7 rules that were broken all the time, but I tried to maintain a clean work atmosphere for not only my staff, but also for the entertainers.
Well, and then that made it fun for guys like me. Because we had bowling night and stuff like that.
Oh, God, we did some crazy stuff, didn't we?
Fun.
Had the bowling parties. We used to take the boat out.
The bowling alley, which was weird, I thought, but still.
We had some after-show parties right there in the club. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate Bob coming in and doing this kind of interview with me and allowing me to name drop some of the interviews and shows. I hope you get a chance to go back and listen to. I do want to reiterate, I've been doing this for over 6 years. There's over 500 shows of
Did you do this by yourself, by the way? Or
comedy entertainment.
Was it just you that came up with the whole idea?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. I was curious. I'm asking.
It's had over 500,000 downloads, so I've been very blessed that people have heard it. And it's gone international. I'm #1 in Ghana. I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm like number 3 in Nigeria, so you never know.
Mr. Big Shot.
Yeah, I can't go to Ghana. Apparently, I'll get swarmed. What do you mean, who helped you get started?
I mean, like the podcast. Did somebody kind of come in and help you set it up? And
No, I've started over a dozen companies in my life, and I've always done them by the seat of my pants. And even though this isn't a company and it's never made $1, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pure measure of my love for the industry. But it was something I had to teach myself. And if you listen to the first like 10 episodes and then listen to the episodes later, you can hear a difference.
And most of those were call-ins, right? Because of COVID. So you just call people in the interviews.
Well, COVID hit right after I launched, which made it difficult to do the interviews, but everybody was home.
Right.
They couldn't work at clubs, and so it was easy.
Did you not also do those little side things, like the Wednesday you had like a little show?
Oh, the bonus shows?
Yeah, bonus shows.
Yeah, those were mostly just pure stand-up comedy. Here's what it is. My interviews and my main show in the beginning was an hour long, and I thought that was the way you did it in the industry, which it kind of was, 6 years ago. But people's attention span has gotten shorter. Now my interviews and shows run about 35, 45 minutes.
So nobody will ever hear the end of this.
No. But I did realize that people needed short bits of comedy. And so I created comedy appetizers, which are 5-minute segments of just stand-up comedy. And those were a development from the bonus shows, which come out every couple weeks. And what I did is I took material recorded back in the 80s and 90s and made short comedy snippets that could kind of brighten up somebody's day. The bonus shows always launched on Wednesday to get you through hump day, and comedy appetizers always launched on Friday, so it kind of lead into your weekend. But yeah, there were just ways to keep the content flowing and try to find the time limit and the content that the audience wanted. Okay. And so, whether you're doing a table talk with 5 guys or an interview with one person or sharing a full hour of stand-up comedy or just a 5-minute comedy set, hopefully each of those finds its audience.
Okay. Well, now that this is wrapping up your podcasting, what's next for Scott Edwards?
Well, you and I just spent a day having a lot of fun.
Don't tell people that.
Creating shows for my new video podcast, the Tag Team Talent Podcast. And what we're doing there with people like you and Bob Stobener and the help of many others is now we're doing a video podcast that shares the actual, now it's still 80s and 90s comedy basically, although most of the videos are less than 3 years old now.
But now you can see what you were talking about on.
Yeah, now you can see what we talked about on the audio podcast over the last 6 years.
Which, by the way, I always thought that you could see the podcast. So I went out and bought expensive lights and cameras thinking that you could see me. And
I want to tell the audience that if you want to have some fun, I think it was probably year 2 or 3 of the podcast, you and I did some of the funniest shows. You tried to be a magician, a ventriloquist, a tightrope walker, a clown. I mean, and then your work as a mime is famous.
Classic. People were amazed that they could not see anything or hear anything.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being patient through this last interview, last opportunity to thank you for being an audience listener, to thank people like Bob Worley and Bob Stobener that help keep this going, and all the really talented people from the industry, from the comics to the club owners to old staff members and friends. It has been such an honor to reconnect with all the people in this amazing industry we call stand-up. And I want to reiterate, and Bob's alluded to it, it's a really tough road, especially to success. And I've been blessed to work with some of the 1%ers that made millions and got famous. But I also appreciate and want to thank the thousands of people that are in this industry that never get famous, never made a ton of money, but they did it
for the love.
For the love.
Because they're artists.
Yeah. Well, that's true, though. It's because they're artists and it's in their soul. I think that's a good point. Anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, Bob, you're the host. Any final message or word for our listening audience?
Scott, it's been an honor. No, I say we just wrap this thing up. Thanks for listening, everybody. It's been a lot of fun. And Scott, thanks for inviting me to do this. It was fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a listener. And for the few people that hear the actual end of the show, God bless you.
Now the time has come.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the final show. The podcast will stay out in the airwaves forever, but this is the final news show. We hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy your life.
Tell your friends. Listen for the new ones.
Yeah, and hey, stay connected to stand-up comedy. It really is can help open your heart and soul to using through laughter, right?
Yeah. Wrap it up, Scott.
All right. Sorry. Bye, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.